Ini nanti di share dari sini. Share dari sini nanti beliau gerakkan. Okay? Slide-nya.
Let's try.
Okay.
Because we also opening up the online so because this is limited, so if the student want to join and the lecturer want to join online.
Very nice.
And we're also streaming it on YouTube. We have YouTube at the school.
Really?
So it's okay with you, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And then I think because the camera is here in the side will be better for the side. So let's go to the top. Yeah, so you can read
Test.
Yep.
Slide yang di sini belum muncul.
Ya, sebentar.
And on YouTube, right?
Since the pandemic, we try to I've been on the other side of the I thought you were in like University of Albert.
Yes.
Yes. I know. I mean, my supervisor, he was studying.
From there.
Yes, from Alberta. I forget the name of this university, but he's now working at Sydney. Yeah.
Yes, there you go. I'll just try. Okay.
Okay.
That's good.
So we're just still waiting for the student to come in.
Okay.
Because I'm also the vice dean. For the student affair, we will come and say something.
Take.
Ada promosi.
So it's been very busy. I realize it's difficult being a tourist. You know, in a short time, you want to see so many things. Yeah. But this is really the highlight from
how to run testings or probably just still the software.
Oh, that's beautiful. It's on the green plants.
The cultural base of it.
Yes. We went to stance.
Barong.
Barong for stance yesterday. And this. And then onto the coast for the sunset. Yeah, it is. I was surprised. You said a lot of. Yeah. Yeah. It's very interesting. Full of coffee shops, restaurants. And, yes. Because when I came 20, 25. So different. Yes.
More rice flour.
More right. That's right. And I only came to Denpasar for 4 hours. I landed in Jakarta, then I transferred to here, and then to Kupang. And then I spent 1 or 2 weeks there. No, everything ended in the COVID. Yes, I had several projects in Africa, mostly maternal child. Hospital development. Then in COVID.
Actually, for the bachelor program, we not teach this one subject called only just like that for the engine.
Yes, that's good because it's so important to know what's going on in the world because we're all affected. So in real time, yeah, especially the here.
Yeah, very
Thousands of people coming.
so quiet.
It's a whole different world now. Education is changing so much. Yeah, it's quantitized. Like now on YouTube, I mean, a few years ago,
Everything online.
everything. My last teaching was to a group of students who were sitting in their bedrooms.
Yes.
And they were supposed to be on the International Olympic Day. China or wherever, but they couldn't go because of COVID. So I was at my home, they were at their home.
Lifeline.
Yeah, we made the best of it. Certainly wasn't. Because this was the end of a bachelor's program. But the last semester is to be overseas.
Overseas
Yeah,
placement,
doing a
yeah.
project. Most difficult time was the first start 20 years ago. Oh, all the hospitals were closed, the medical school closed. Couldn't go in. Because mostly medical. Because somebody with the disease
For the stars, for the fall.
yeah, now the COVID, yeah. Yes, also a lot of health workers. Yeah. So it's a very difficult task. But the biggest problem now, I think, is discipline. picture some of the temples.
Oh, yes. I've never been to Canada. Yeah, welcome. Yeah. Father-in-law is Minnesota. Is that very close already to Canada?
Very close.
Yeah. I used to do some Canadian count to Minnesota during the weekend for doing something. Fishing, yeah. We have a lot of lakes in Minnesota. A lot of 10,000 lakes.
It's a similar climate to
Canada.
yeah, lots of snow. Not this one.
Our legend.
Is it?
Yes, he is a legend in the second. The head of the pack.
Yes. Toronto because for a long time it was the only university very expensive. So now we have
Montreal. Oh. A bit crowded.
Nah, ini. Cek. Oke, kita mulai nggih. Om Swastiastu. Selamat sore. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. Our honorary Vice Dean for Student Information and Cooperation of Prayer for Adi Wirawan. The head of Psychiatry Department, Dr. Putri, and also the head from Magister program has not joined yet. She will join later on. And our lecturer, Prof. Suryani, and obviously our distinguished guest, Professor David Zakus from University of Toronto. Thank you for coming and for sharing with our student today. So on the participant, there are students from the Bachelor of Public Health program, also from Master of Public Health, and Psychiatry Residence program. So I think this is a very good opportunity for all of us to learn from you, because as we discussed earlier, we obviously experience climate change as we live our daily life, and Bali is not this hot before. Like we have better weather before, and then we observe how the climate change has impacted in our daily life and also in the public health in general. So actually, during the pandemic, our school has been conducting a webinar on planetary health, which is, I think, also on your expertise. So we really look forward for our discussion today. I hope the student also will have a good learning experience today, and also will please feel free to ask question either in Bahasa or in English. And the lecture today will be also streamed on YouTube, Kesmas TV, and also we will open up the Zoom, but there's no participant join yet, so we will invite the student to join. I think some of them has finished their class. And yeah, without further ado, I would like to invite Prof. Adi Wirawan to give some welcoming remark for our guest lecture today.
Thank you, Dr. Ayu, Professor David Zakus from Toronto University, Professor Suryani, our teacher. Thank you. Dr. Putri, the head of Department of Psychiatry, Dr. Ayu, and Dr. Savitri from the Bachelor and Master of Public Health, all the participants, all these students from Bachelor and Master of Public Health, as well as from the Psychiatry residency program. We are very fortunate today that we will have a lecture on very important and interesting topic. So it's the intersection of the climate crisis and global health. Something that already a lot of spoken in in the public health community, but we don't know much about it yet. So what are this actually? What are the impacts on as we in the tropical area? What are the consequences? And because probably in the four season country like in Canada, the changes is more obvious. But here we just feel hotter and hotter every day. Yeah. So thank you for coming today. On behalf of the Dean, currently our Dean is in a meeting at our main campus in Jimbaran. So he apologized for not coming today to greet you and delegate me to welcome you here. So once again, thank you very much for coming today, and welcome to Udayana University, Faculty of Medicine. Welcome to Bali. Our Faculty of Medicine consists of 36 now, soon 35 programs, 37, soon 37 study programs. So we have 6 bachelor programs for in the professions, we call it profession level, 3 master programs, 1 doctoral programs, and the rest are medical residency, and also a medical subspecialist program. So because in Indonesia, we still use the university-based medical residency. So all of the medical residents enroll through the university. Probably it's a bit quite different to Canada. No, it's the same. Also, Canada also university-based. Okay. And for our students, please enjoy the lecture. It's a very rare topic from the expert. I saw on your CVs that you are also editor in the planetary health, something that's the term that very interesting. What is planetary health? So it's very interesting. We heard about public health, global health, One Health, and planetary health. So yeah, perfect. Thank you for coming and giving this very important lecture to our students. So that's from me. Please enjoy the lecture, and we hope that you will get as much as possible the knowledge, the experience, that expertise that will be shared by our guest today. So, I conclude with Parama Santi, Om, Santi, 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 Om. Assalamualaikum, Salam, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Sejahtera untuk kita semua. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Prof. Adi. I forget to introduce myself. My name is Ayu Swandewi. I'm currently the coordinator for Bachelor of Public Health program. So one of the bachelor program is Bachelor of Public Health. We have Bachelor of Nursing, Medicine, Psychology, Physiotherapy, Dentistry. I think that's all. Yeah, six program. Yeah. So like Prof. Adi mentioned, our guest lecture today is Prof. David Zakus. I hope I pronounce it correctly. From Dalalana School of Public Health at the University of Toronto. He's also the founder of the Planetary Health Weekly, which is we really want to hear as well. And the guest lecture today will be moderated by our own Dr. Cokorda Bagus Jaya Lesmana, Sp.K.J Mars. He is a senior lecturer at the psychiatry study program and also Bachelor of Medicine and medical program. So I will hand it over to Dr. Cho to moderate the session and also maybe introduce Prof. David more further. Thank you. Oh ya, boleh foto bersama. Okay. So before our Vice Dean leave for other meeting, so we need to take photo. Yeah. Di sini di depan nggih, mau di depan dok. Di depan dulu nanti ngadep ke mahasiswa. Oke, 2 kali. Miring, miring Prof. Prof nggih. Di depan.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ayu, for giving the time for us and for me to lead the meeting this afternoon. As mentioned before, it's been an honor to have Professor David to join us in this afternoon. Many of us were asking me, how do you know Professor David? Have you known him for a long time? So I have to say that this is my first time to meet him in person. He was introduced by our dear family, Dr. Mel Borin from Toronto, that told us Professor David is on the way to Bali, and if possible, help him kind of like connect to the Udayana University. So for me, it's an honor to host him here in Udayana University, and that's why I try to contact with our colleague in public health how to make today's meeting possible. So today's meeting is a joint meeting between public health department and the Department of Psychiatry. So that's why the idea in the beginning is to ask Professor David to talk about mental health, but then he mentioned mental health is not his expertise, but more on the global health. So we will have a better or broader understanding now about global health, and also learn from Professor David what should we do for our planet, what should we do for our environment, our earth, because for all this time, when we live in a tropical country, we often difficult to differentiate between weather, season, and climate. We thought all the same. But I think today we learn about all of this, and then try to be more wise with our place to live. And I don't want to more detail explain or introduce you, because if I read your bio, 6 pages long, so so much experience, and I can understand that you are a special person to care about our environment, our global health. So I will let you to introduce yourself, and to more interact with our student, our lecturer here, so that we can learn more from you. So, Professor David, without further notice, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cokorda. I am just so happy to be here. It is truly my honor and privilege to be able to be here today with you in Bali, especially as I had first intended to come here as a tourist. And what a real honor and like an award to be able to come and be here today with you, and especially to talk to you about perhaps one of the very most important issues confronting our whole world today, and that's the climate crisis. Now, I started out, like some of you students, as a student many, many years ago, and I still consider myself a student. I still consider myself a learner, wanting to improve my knowledge, to try to improve my understanding of what's going on. And so I spent the first 25 years or more working mostly in the area of primary healthcare. You know, after the conference in Alma-Ata in 1978, primary healthcare was designated as the strategy to try to improve health worldwide for all peoples of the world. And one of the pillars of primary healthcare is community participation, the active involvement of communities in their own healthcare, in trying to improve their lives by having a say in the development of their services that are given to them or afforded to them by the government or by other institutions. And that was what got me really going and trying to understand more about what's going on in the world. And the last few years before COVID, I was mostly working in the area of maternal child health. Now, the area of my specialty is in management, in health services management. That was what I did my PhD in, graduated in 1992 with a PhD in organization behavior. Now, I'll just say that for all of you in public health and psychiatry, it is very important to understand how organizations work, because it is through organizations that we get things done in the world. As an individual, yes, we have power, we have some agency, we're able to do things, but it's mostly when we get together with other people with a purpose, and that's what an organization is. And so it's very important to understand how organizations work and how they're able to accomplish their goals. And so I spent probably the first 20 years teaching the principles of management, of healthcare around the world. You'll see I was visiting professor at several Chinese universities and went there many times to teach management to their hospital directors and to their professors. And it was very, very interesting time indeed being there in China and watching them develop from a relatively sort of poor country to now one of the top economic powers of the world, and including very strong universities and very strong medicine and healthcare. So I spent so much time in the field, first started in working in countries in Central America, in Honduras. I originally trained with a master's degree in nutrition. And so I started as a nutritionist, a clinical nutritionist, working with malnourished children in rural areas of Honduras, a small country between South and North America. And eventually, after about 10 years of that work in Latin America, I shifted my focus to Africa, because Africa to me was the greatest challenge at the time. It was the poorest continent. It needed the most attention. It needed the most sharing of people and interconnecting together with people. And as you'll see when I get to the very end of my presentations, one of the most important things that you can do is communicate with people in their communities, in their homes, in their life and what they're doing, in their places of employment, trying to reach and communicate your ideas about health and about public health and psychiatry to people on the ground, to where they're at. And so after many years of working in Africa, and I just more or less finished just another year or two ago,
During COVID, sort of everything kind of stopped. And not only did the funding run out for some of the projects, but it was very difficult to maintain relationships. And without being able to be together with people, it's very difficult to work together. You know, we're getting used to working now, you know, on the internet and Zoom meetings and things like that, but nothing replaces person to person. And I think that that's something I've learned over all of my life, that it's the interconnection between people that is really so important. And so I've spent most of my time as a professor in medical schools and working with the medical students on their electives in what we called international health, in primary health care, and then ultimately we called international health, we called it global health. Because the international health was kind of like us and them. But now it's not us and them, it's all of us together. We're all equal. Before, we used to kind of think that we were a bit smarter maybe, or we had more knowledge, more information, you know, we had more schooling, more education. But now the world is catching up and has caught up. And we also understand now that the most important thing is to base all what we do in human rights. That everybody is created equal, that everybody, doesn't matter if you're rich, middle, or poor, we all have the same human rights. We have the right to life. We have the right to health services, to education, to freedom of speech, etc. And so taking that approach began to change my mind and to make me understand more about the kind of work that I was doing. And then, lo and behold, wasn't the physical world around us starting to change? We began with what we called climate change, where through our pollution, the products of our industrial production, our industrial revolution, we now understand that some of those products are hurting the earth. They are causing the earth to get sick. The earth is actually physically developing a fever. And so as I started to read more and understand more about what's going on to the earth itself, to our planet, I thought, oh my gosh, I have to start to integrate that into my work of primary healthcare, into my work of maternal child health, into my work on vaccinations and nutrition and all the other things that I was involved in. And ultimately, as I got older and started to sort of retire from things a little bit, I realized that I would be better placed to put my energies into educating and learning and continuing to learn myself about what's going on physically to the world. And so that's how I integrated what I called global health, my work with people around the world in healthcare and in health services, to what was going on to the earth itself, and I call that planetary health. And I got the idea from the editor of the Lancet journal. I can't think of his first name, but his last name is Horton. And he wrote an editorial about 7, 8 years ago called Planetary Health, in which he began to integrate the ideas of health services and healthcare and primary care into what's going on to the wellness and the health of the world itself. And he called that planetary health. So I thought, bingo, that's it. That's who I want to be. So for the last 9 years, I started this free newsletter, and I'll show you more about that. It's free. It comes out every Thursday, which is today. And it integrates the issues of global health and environmental wellness. Now, you mentioned about One Health. Yeah, it's more or less exactly the same thing. That we look at the One Health, the concept is human health, animal health, and environmental health, the health of the environment. And so that is the same basically as planetary health, because we always have to think too about the health of the animals. We rely on the animals, we are an animal, you know, we're just a little bit higher up, we think. And so the One Health and planetary health are basically the same thing. About 10 years ago, or maybe 12, the government of Canada hired me to write a position paper on One Health. They wanted to change our Ministry of Health to have a primary focus on One Health. So I spent many months working and learning about One Health, and then submitted my report. And then, of course, what happens many times with government reports is nothing happened. And in fact, while we do have a very good healthcare system in Canada, it is in dire need of reform and hasn't been changed really since 1984. So it's very difficult to change things like that, especially when politicians have all the power and not the doctors and not the nurses and not the public health people. That we have to deal with all the different nexus of power, power of our profession, power of politicians, power of the public, etc. And I'll get a bit into that too later in my presentation. So that's how I have come to this position today about planetary health, and I'll explain a little bit more. But it's been a journey. And a lifelong journey of learning and continually reading. And I spend most all my time reading. My wife here, who's accompanied me today, Debbie, we both like reading a lot. So we spend all our days on our, our little phones and our computers reading now and communicating with other people. So I think I'll just start and sure. I'll stand over here to the side. So these are my 3 messages today. We have to do something. We have to act. The world will never get better. Our societies will never improve unless you, and me, we do something. We have to come together to act, and we have to do what we can. We're here at the university, we have very special privileges. I know I have 4 university degrees. It is a huge privilege. My parents, when I was a little boy, they always talked to me about how the education is so important. My mother was a nurse and my father was an accountant, and they wanted me to have the best education I could. And I took it to heart. So I went to the extreme and I believed in that. And that was what I could do. And now what I can do too is to teach. And I love to be able to be with students and with other professors. And so it's all about learning and action. And what we're focused on today are actually the 2 crises that we're experiencing at the same time. The one is the climate crisis. And it's no longer just climate change. We're in crisis situation. There's no question anymore about that. And you'll see, I'll make it very clear. And we're also in a biodiversity crisis. We are eliminating every single day species of animals, insects, birds, mammals, all around the world. They're dying out. And that's because we're changing the environment. And they're also being impacted by climate change in a very big way, because they're smart, I believe. Personally, I believe all animals are very smart and they will try to adapt, but they can't just pack their bags and move away and try a different climate or something. They're kind of stuck. If you're an ant or a bird, you only have so much area to get along with. So today I'm very honored and pleased to be able to share some of these ideas with you. And I hope you will think more about them. And I hope that while I'm talking, you'll think about what you can do. You'll think about your family. I mentioned that I taught about management and organization. Well, there's no more important organization in the world than the family. The family is the basic organization of every society on earth. So we're a product of our families. And it's very interesting because we think about how diverse the world is, but just think about how diverse families are too, about your brother or sister or mother and father. We're all very different, even within one family, but we're united by a very special bond and all coming from our mother and our father. And so the family is the basic organizational unit of all societies. And then we have other levels of organization as well. But so it was such an interesting revelation to me that when I learned and studied about organization behavior, about how everything that I learned could apply to the family. Everything about change, processes of change and learning and how to accomplish things and how to be a strong, closely together family, etc. So I like to first start to illustrate how there is so much change in the world. And one of the biggest issues of organization behavior is change. How do we change organizations? How do we change our society to keep up with what's going on? And there are so many, and in organization behavior, one of the basic principles is the idea and the understanding of the internal environment and the external environment. The internal environment would be like the family or the organization, the university. But the external environment is all of the rest of society, the politics, the economics, and the media, and all these different things and how they impact on an organization. And that's why it's so important to understand all these different interrelationships on how organizations work. But one of the greatest achievements of humankind was in around the 1550s, about 500 years ago almost, when a guy named Mercator, he was from Belgium, and he developed what we call the Mercator map. And the Mercator map, now people had maps before. The Romans had maps, the Greeks had maps. I know that some of the kings of Indonesia and Malaysia, they had maps hundreds and many hundreds of years ago. But this guy developed a map where it was an accurate representation of the distance between points so that people could use it for navigation. And it lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years as the only kind of map that was being used in navigation, in understanding society and where people live, and particularly in war. I mean, so many things were developed because of wars and military. But if you look at that, you'll see that Africa is about the same size as North America, or even smaller. And look at how big Canada is. Canada is almost the same size of all of Africa. Well, that is totally wrong. That is not what the world looks like. And so only about 50, 60 years ago, people started to make a different kind of map. It was called the Peters projection by an Australian academic, a geographer. And he created a map where it showed accurate representation of the landmass of each country in the world. And you'll see now that, well, Canada, my country, is still so large, it doesn't even fit into the top part of Africa. But on this map, we're bigger than Africa. And so people were denied really understanding about who they were and where they came from, because we minimized certain cultures and certain parts of the world sort of to our advantage. And it made North America and it made Western Europe all look so big and powerful, whereas in reality, it's not. And where in reality, all of Western Europe fits into the country of the Democratic Republic of Congo. The entire Western Europe is smaller than the Congo. Yeah, one country out of 54 in Africa. Then, in the early 1960s, we sent up a few people outside of our atmosphere, and they took a picture here of the Earth rising from outer space. And that changed us all again. We began to see ourselves as one, that there wasn't this map and that if you go to the end of the map, you fall off. But if you go to the end here, you just keep going around. And of course, we know that some people like Galileo and Copernicus and others, they proved to the world that we were actually round, not flat. And then if you go to the end of the ocean, you fall off somewhere. Nobody knew where you fell off to. But now we see ourselves like this. We see ourselves as a whole, as a complete entity. It's like a family. We're just one, and there is no side and up and down and backwards and whatever. And we also see that most of the world isn't where we live. Over 70% of the globe is ocean, and landmass is only about 30 or less than 30%. Now, can we play the video? Just have a short video. It's 4 minutes. There it is.
Our planet is vast. It's difficult to comprehend the scale. It's difficult, too, to comprehend the scale of humanity and the vast changes we've wrought in a lifetime. Population, production, and consumption have grown exponentially. Roads, railways, airlines, shipping routes, the digital revolution. We've created a globally interconnected society. Evidence is mounting, we've entered the Anthropocene. Humanity is altering Earth's life support system. Carbon dioxide emissions are accelerating. Greenhouse gas levels are unprecedented in human history. The climate system is changing rapidly. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change assesses the risks and options for societies. Its latest report states it is extremely likely humans are the dominant cause of warming in the past 60 years. Without deep emissions cuts, it is likely Earth will cross the target of 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, the target set by international policy. This could happen as early as 2050. If emissions keep rising at current rates, a 4-degree rise by 2100 is as likely as not. It's very likely heat waves will occur more often and last longer. The Arctic will warm faster than the global average. It's likely sea ice will all but vanish in summer within decades if high emissions continue. It's very likely sea level rise will accelerate. Cities and coastal areas are vulnerable. In general, wet regions are set to get wetter, dry regions drier. Monsoons are likely to become longer, their footprint likely to grow, and downpours likely to intensify. The acidity of the ocean has increased 26% since the start of the Industrial Revolution. The full consequences of all these changes on the Earth system are unknown. Humanity's carbon footprint is huge. Societies will need to adapt to climate change. The scale of change depends on decisions made now. Can we remain below 2 degrees? It is possible, but it is up to societies now to decide the future we want. For a likely chance of achieving the 2-degree target, societies can emit another 250 billion tons of carbon. We burn about 10 billion tons of carbon a year. At current rates, we will use this budget in about 25 years.
I just want to say too that that video is about 4 or 5 years old, and while the data were correct then, they are now all worse. Everything that she mentioned is all now worse. For instance, she mentioned that our global carbon emissions are 10 billion tons a year. Now they are 33 billion tons a year. That's 100 billion tons a day of carbon being put into our atmosphere every single day. And when she mentioned about 2 degrees, we now have a target of 1.5 degrees that we don't want to reach by the year 2030. But now we're in the year 2024, and we're just about there. We're almost at 1.5. In fact, this year, 2024, could see an average global temperature increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius. Last year, it was 1.47. Now, that is...
Prof, could you use the mic because some people
yes,
online...
Yes, sorry.
Thank you.
And that is mostly because we have right now happening what we call this El Nino event, which takes place in the Pacific Ocean when about every 6 or 7 years, the currents change and it causes an exacerbation of the heat effects. But what's happening now is that the El Nino is coming back more often. Then the El Nino is followed by La Nina. And now El Nino is a Spanish name meaning the boy, and La Nina is a Spanish name meaning the girl, the little girl. And usually it's followed by a La Nina event, which sort of causes a cooling. So in the end, it sort of balances things out, but not anymore. The El Nino event is getting stronger and stronger. The La Nina event is getting weaker and weaker. And so there is more and more heating. And then wait till you see what I'm going to show you next. So now, planetary health, I already mentioned, was about human health, animal health, and environmental wellness, similar to One Health. So it's very easy. And the video talked about the effects of the environment and the heating of the ocean for one, but also the increasing of rains and the increasing of dryness, of droughts. And so we're experiencing in our globe today, in our Earth today, huge events of environmental destruction and degradation. We have pollution of air, water, and soil all over the world. We have deforestation. We're cutting down what some people call the lungs of the world, the lungs of the earth, because trees, leaves absorb carbon dioxide and give off oxygen. And we take into our lungs oxygen and give off carbon dioxide. So the trees are like the lungs of the world, keeping us safe. And ocean acidification, which the video mentioned. And the biggest thing that's happening right now, almost in the world, one of the most important events is the warming of the ocean. Last year, 2023, saw a huge increase of the global warming of the entire ocean of the Earth. The entire ocean went up by several degrees Celsius. Now, that is a big issue because over millions and millions of years, all the life in the ocean, just like the life on the land, it evolved to be what it is today. And it doesn't just change because something changes really quickly. It takes millions and millions of years for evolution to take place. And now we're warming the ocean so much that all the life of the ocean now is being affected. And one of the biggest issues of the warming of the ocean is that, as you know, when you warm anything, when you warm any fluid, when you warm any solid, what do? They expand. And so as we're heating the ocean, it is literally expanding, thereby giving us the rising oceans and all the sort of the risk being involved with higher tides. And especially, you know, sometimes the moon, I'm not sure here, but we get this special moon in Canada. We call it I forget now, but when the tides are even higher. And so if you get ocean rising and high tides, you get towns on the coast being wiped out. We've had so many instances in Canada now of villages, of fishermen, where their villages are being destroyed because of the rising ocean and the bigger waves. So it's not just because the ocean is rising like a millimeter a year, but it's when you rise a millimeter a year, even a millimeter a decade, but over 10 decades, that's a centimeter. And after another, it's more and more. And the ocean then now, and we're heating it up more and more. So we don't even really know what's going to happen in the future. We honestly really don't, because we're entering into new territory. We're entering into real new science. Also, urbanization, big issue. We know that. You mentioned about Denpasar getting so crowded. Well, all cities are getting huger and more crowded, and more pollution and more waste, and more people touching and physically bumping into each other. And it's happening every single day. Millions of people are moving into cities all over the world. Right now, it's over 50%, but in 20 years, it's going to, or in less than 20 years even, it'll be 70% of the world is going to be living in cities. And then you wonder, well, who's going to do all the farming? Yeah, that's a big issue. Right now, especially in Canada, no Canadians hardly want to farm. All the young people, it's too hard work farming. You know, you're out in the fields and all that sort of thing, and running big machines and cows and chickens, and people want to have a job in an office or now in a coffee shop or something. This is a big issue. Waste, I mentioned that, and it particularly relates to urbanization. We have a huge waste problem of all sorts. Our cities are drowning in waste. And so we have global climate change and global heating leading now to what we call the global crisis, climate crisis. And the biodiversity loss is now reached crisis proportions too. And in addition, we add 225,000 people to the world every single day. 250,000 people are being added to the world. That is the excess of births over deaths. And it is 250,000 people every single day added to the world. So every week, that's almost like 2 million new people in the world. At the end of the year, that's 100 million new people. Where are they all going to go? What are they all going to do? It's a big issue. So the environment and health. Now, this presentation is going to be made available to you. You can use it as you like. You can show it to your friends. You can change it. You can use the slides, do whatever you like with it. And so I'm going to skip over some of the slides that have a fair amount of writing on them. But I just want to talk about environmental health comprises those aspects of human health, including quality of life. Now, that's really important too, that are determined by physical, chemical, biological, social, and psychological factors in the environment. So our health is affected by so many different things. It's not just the air that we breathe. It's not just the where we come from or how wealthy we are, but it's our psychological state. It's our social state. How do we get along? Are we at war with each other, et cetera, et cetera? So many things impact. And of course, you know, we've all just been through one of the biggest pandemics ever in the history of the world. And we'll talk a tiny bit about that, but I'm not going to talk much about that. So what is climate change? It's so simple. It's the repeated and increasing unusual changes to our usual and historical climate and weather patterns. The weather always has fluctuated. It gets cold and it gets warmer, and every 30 years you get a drought or every whatever. But now everything that we were used to, everything that was usual in the past is being exacerbated. It's changing. It's getting worse. If it was getting better, the fluctuations were decreasing, yeah, that might be better, but it's not. And a lot of people will say, well, climate change is just a part of the historical fluctuations. Well, it's not. And I'm going to show you why that is so wrong. Oh, and it's been going on mostly since about 1960. So the last 60 years, 64 years or whatever. It started generally in the mid 1800s with the advent of the Industrial Revolution and the invention of machines that were powered by steam. The steam engine for railways, for cars, for whatever, of getting us around rather than just using horses, which was all that we had in the past. And how do you create the steam? Well, it was from burning wood or burning coal. And burning coal turns out to be one of the dirtiest things we can do in our world in terms of the pollution to the air. And it's been going on, but now, especially in these last 50 years, things are really getting worse. And because we're polluting more and more and more, the pollution, the carbon emissions are not declining. Every year, the world comes together at one of these big conferences and says, oh, we got to reduce carbon emissions. Every year, carbon emissions go up. So now we have a climate crisis, the confluence of so many highly damaging related climate events, year after year without change or slowdown. There was a tiny slowdown during COVID in 2021. Things slowed down just a little bit. Didn't matter. It only slowed the increase. It slowed the increase of carbon emissions from one by about 1/2. It didn't stop the increase. It just slowed the increase for 1 year because industrial production declined quite significantly around the world. And in 2022, there were so many examples of huge climate events and also very costly. So there was Hurricane Fiona, which bulldozed across the eastern part of our country like a post-tropical storm. We don't get tropical storms in Canada, believe me. But in September 2022, it caused more than 25 deaths, displaced 13,000 people, and cost nearly $4 billion in damages, just from one storm. Never like that anything ever happened before. Also, as more and more people inhabit these areas, more people are going to become affected. As population increases, instead of 13,000 in 10 years, it'll be 25,000 displaced or whatever. And here's just from last year, climate-related events, and it just got worse. We thought 2022 was really bad. 2023 was even worse. Big tropical storms in Africa, big cyclones in Myanmar and Bangladesh, affecting nearly 3.4 million people, including 1 million Rohingya refugees. These were people already displaced from Myanmar, living in Bangladesh, and then a giant cyclone hits, and they're living just in little shacks to begin with. And you know that Bangladesh at some time of the year is about 50% underwater. Well, during these cyclones, it's even way more than 50%. And then in August last year, not too long ago, the deadliest US wildfire over a century devastated the island of Hawaii, of Maui, leveling an historic town. And in the September, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which I mentioned, which is in West Africa, there was a storm that killed 483 people. And then it just goes on, and you can read these later. But one of the biggest ones was when in September last year, a Mediterranean storm passed through eastern Libya. Now, we don't really hear much about Libya anymore, right? But this storm passed through, and it created the collapse of 2 dams. And it was discovered, of course, that those dams had not been receiving the maintenance that they should because of corruption and other things. The politicians were putting the money in their pockets instead of fixing their dams. 2 dams collapsed, sending 1 billion cubic feet of water into an already flooded area. It devastated the country for months and months and months. Hurricane Otis struck the Pacific coast of Mexico, 5 miles south of one of the biggest cities of Mexico. It eliminated 80% of that city. Acapulco has about 2 million people. It's also a huge tourist resort. It's like Bali in Mexico, kind of, and very wealthy, lots of very rich people. It wiped out 80% of the city, the floods. It just goes on. That's a picture from Mexico. Wildfires. Now, this is something that particularly affects the Northern Hemisphere, but it also affects Australia. I'm sure you've heard about the big wildfires around Sydney and Melbourne and everything in Australia. But in Canada, we have a huge problem with wildfires, and especially last year. Last year was unlike no other in our history, ever. We lost about 18.5 million hectares of forest to wildfires. I'm not even sure how big Mali is, but 18 million hectares is a huge amount. It's actually about 5% of our entire forests in Canada were burnt last year. Take a look at this. These are the historical records of Canada for wildfires. And between 2016 and 22, that was the amount of hectares that were burnt every year. And then look at 2023. Where my brother lives, in a town in British Columbia, which almost got destroyed by fire about 10 years ago, he told me he wakes up every single morning checking the weather and checking the news to see if there's a fire near where he lives, because fires were wiping out communities. One whole city in Canada had to be evacuated. It was called Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories. 20,000 people had to leave their homes and flee to the south. Wildfire, it's a huge issue. You can see this there. You can see the lights of the towns and the sort of the urbanization, and then the fires burning right behind them. This is last year in August. This is, it's a scary, scary thing. Unbelievable. Here's during the month of August again, showing where all the wildfires were in Canada, right across our country, right from the West Coast in British Columbia all the way to Quebec and Newfoundland and Labrador on the East Coast. Wildfires breaking out. And now we're discovering just recently that many of those fires were not extinguished during the winter. Now, we get winter every year. It snows and it gets really cold. But this winter was very mild, very little snow, and many of those fires are actually staying alive under the ground. Under the ground. They're called subterranean fires, and they're expecting them now in April and May to burst out again. And we'll see what happens. It's a very important issue for Canada. China. huge issues with the climate change. And you know, China is the biggest polluting country in the world, but they've had such huge problems with drought and with flooding and with all kinds of environmental issues. On September 2nd last year, that's just 6 months away, Typhoon Saola hit southern China, prompting the evacuation of more than 880,000 people. Can you imagine evacuation of about 1 million people from an area? Just incredible. The water rushing through the streets. So this is from, sorry, I don't know what happened here. This is from X, from Facebook. Just a week ago, today's March 28th, this was on March 21st, record highest temperature, minimum temperatures, T-mins, minimum temperatures all over Indonesia. 28.2 degrees in Nara, 27.5 in Larangtuka, hottest night on record, 28.5 in Saudi Arabia, in Kenya, and almost every country in the tropics are experiencing high record minimum temperatures. So you mentioned, Professor, about how it's getting hotter here in general, but one of the worst things is that the nights aren't cooling. And this is a very important issue for older people, particularly for anybody without air conditioning. It's very difficult to sleep when it's 28 or 29 degrees. And for young children whose bodies aren't able to regulate their heat ability as much. So dozens of records in Indonesia were broken this month alone, in March this year. Also, in all over Oceania, all over Asia, all over Africa, 124 countries broke records in just a few days. This is real time. This is not, you know, something like I showed you in 2023. This is March 2024. This is it. Record highs all over Thailand. Thailand is having record high minimum temperatures in almost every city in the country. This was Jakarta just a few days ago. Now I know that, you know, the pollution isn't necessarily caused by the climate change, but the pollution is one aspect of it. We're polluting our world in such a bad, this was from my hotel window just a few days ago. So our future today, what are the impacts? So there will be, and it is happening, an increase of disease, both infectious and non-communicable disease. Psychiatric diseases are increasing. I'm going to come to that soon, including mental disease. Extreme weather events leading to injury, morbidity, and mortality. So one of those slides said 23 people died, but at the same time, hundreds of people were injured. And that's not even, you know, we're not even really recording that because we're just focused on the deaths. But hunger, famine, malnutrition from changing agriculture. Agriculture is based on reliability of the weather. Farmers are the smartest, I think, have some of the smartest people on earth because they understand the environment so that they can know when to plant their crops. They know when to harvest their crops. They know, we saw yesterday the terraced fields of the water going from one to the next that have been there for 1,000 years. Farmers know how, but now it's changing. And how do they then change with what's going on now when they've been doing the same things to produce food for us for thousands of years? Decrease in fresh water supplies. This is a really big issue because we all have to have fresh water to live. And as the oceans are rising, fresh water in lakes and rivers is being contaminated by the big floods, by the big waves that I mentioned that are coming in. And in fact, one country in Oceania, Tuvalu, it had 2 years ago, it had such big storms that their entire freshwater system was polluted and the people had to leave. They could not exist there anymore. You can't just live on bottled water. Decrease in biodiversity. This is a huge issue, and we're going to see a bit more about that, and huge economic impacts. Last year alone, just in the United States, the climate change was responsible for $180 billion of losses. And you watch, 2024, it's going to be way more than that. So how is climate crisis caused? What is behind it? Why? How come it's happening? Now, it's caused by the heating of the Earth's atmosphere and subsequently of its waters, particularly the ocean. So as the atmosphere warms, the oceans warm too, because they absorb the heat and it changes everything. So how is it that the atmosphere is warming? Now, I just want to point out to you here on the right-hand side at the bottom that, sorry, I was just a bit ahead of myself. I just wanted to show you something. There. So what's in the air? The air, our atmosphere, is composed of 78% nitrogen gas. That's what we're breathing. Right now, 78% of it is nitrogen gas. 20%, 21% is oxygen. And about 1% is what's called argon. And then what's left over, and it only comprises 0.04% of the atmosphere, are all the greenhouse gases, including carbon dioxide, nitrous dioxide, ozone, and methane. Methane is another big one. So the take away message here is that the greenhouse gases are a very, very, very small portion of our atmosphere. So when we're putting 30 billion tons of just one of those gases into our atmosphere every year, it makes a huge effect on that tiny little percentage. If we were emitting oxygen of 30 billion tons a year, it wouldn't be so bad, or especially nitrogen. But we're not. We're emitting these greenhouse gases from our industrial production and our transportation, et cetera, and agriculture, affecting a super small portion of our air. So that's why when we're polluting it, and when it began in the 1800s, well, it wasn't so much. It was just a little bit and a little bit, but a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And now it's a lot more and a lot more and a lot more, affecting a very small proportion. So it has a huge impact on the relative proportion of the greenhouse gases. Now, this is very simple. Okay, this is one of my biggest messages, is that the cause of the climate crisis is very simple. The heating of the atmosphere is actually very simple. Now, all energy that we get, all physical energy, and I say that today because I'm learning in Bali more about spiritual energy, but all physical energy on Earth comes from the sun. And the radiation from the sun that is emitted, it comes down to our Earth, and it comes as visible light and ultraviolet waves. And it's either absorbed, and it makes us warm, and thereby it heats the Earth, or it's reflected back from the Earth's surface back out into the atmosphere. Now, the thing is, and this is a physical property of light that was proven in the late 1890s, by a physicist, and so we've known this for over 100 years, when the shortwave radiations come in from the sun, the light that we see in colors and everything, and ultraviolet light, which we don't see, it is absorbed, and when it hits the Earth, it actually physically changes to long wave radiation, which is thermal radiation, heat radiation, infrared radiation. So the shortwave changes into long wave. Now, when the short waves come through the atmosphere, they come through without affecting any of the gases. But those greenhouse gases, methane, carbon dioxide, ozone, and nitrous oxide, they absorb long wave radiation. This is a proven physical fact. And so when the light gets bounced back into the atmosphere, that very small proportion of our atmosphere absorbs the infrared radiation. And what does it do? It creates heat, and it warms the atmosphere. It is so simple to understand. And it drives me crazy when you get climate change deniers and other people saying that it's not true and all this kind of stuff. And it's been actually physically known for over 100 years how this works. And so that is what is warming the Earth. It's the increase. Now, that carbon dioxide, that little bit of methane, that little bit of nitrous dioxide and ozone has been around for hundreds and thousands, millions of years. It fluctuates also because even volcanoes affect it, like Krakatoa, but it's been like that. And so all life on Earth has evolved with those percentages of gases for millions and hundreds of millions of years, hundreds of millions of years. And now we're changing it. We're increasing that percentage of those gases, and it's warming the earth for the very first time like this ever. And that is what's causing the climate crisis. So simple. So the shortwave radiation comes in, some gets reflected back off of clouds, off of ice. This is another big problem. As the world warms, the ice is disappearing now. Even in Canada, we're talking about having no ice in the Arctic Ocean in the summer. And that would be the very first time ever in hundreds of millions of years, because the polar regions of the world help moderate the temperature. And when you get rid of the ice, because the sun's light is actually reflected back by the ice. But now without ice, the sun's rays are going to be absorbed by the water, which heats them up. And that is a huge issue. And we call that a tipping point. We're about to see a tipping point when all the ice of the world might disappear. So in 1950, the world emitted 6 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year. In 1990, it was 20 billion. Now it's over 37, I was wrong. It's over 37 billion tons a year, over 100 million tons a year. So we are physically altering how we live. And most of that pollution, most of that emission is from the use of energy, of gas, coal, methane. And when we burn it, it releases carbon dioxide. But also agriculture and transportation. So this is a picture of the pipelines, the oil pipelines around the world. We've developed a very prosperous and modern society using oil. There is absolutely no question, without oil being discovered in the early 1900s and being able to burn it and run our cars and our machines in our factories and everything and our ships, we wouldn't have the level of standard of living that we have today. But now, and we've created pipelines for shipping it all over the world. And so it's being distributed and it's being burned by more and more people everywhere. But we've got to change. That's the bottom line. Now, here is a look at the years from 1850, what does it say? From 0 to 1950 in terms of atmospheric carbon dioxide. So it fluctuates, and it fluctuates according to the seasons. And like I said, with the ice and everything helping to moderate the light, and it's just been more, and now there's where we are in such a short period of time. Whoops. These are measurements of both in Antarctica and a very special place in Hawaii that measures atmospheric gases. This is from the year 1000 to today. And that's what carbon dioxide emissions. And then you look and see what's happening today. Here it is again. And when you look at the fluctuations according to the seasons, and then you get a straight line through it. And here, that was from, that's both from Hawaii. So we can see that the major effects are taking place right now from our heating our atmosphere, from continually higher levels of CO2 and other greenhouse gases. It's just getting going. You saw that chart, eh? It's just spiking now. Well, that's just the beginning. It's just what we're just doing in the last 5 to 10 years. And it's just going to keep on going, which is very, very scary. I don't want to, scare everybody and stuff, but it isn't a good prognosis. In medicine, we deal with prognosis, right? This is not a good prognosis for what's going on in our world today. So the oceans warm, the startling Arctic and Antarctic sea ice decline, the glaciers all over the world are melting. They're predicting that the Himalayan glaciers may disappear in about 20 years. So if the Himalayan glaciers disappear, what's going to happen to India? What's going to happen to Pakistan? What's going to happen to Bangladesh? All those countries that get all their water from the Himalayas. There'll be no more water coming. And we've got 1.4 billion people in India. We have close to, 200 million people in Bangladesh, similarly in Pakistan. Hundreds and hundreds of millions, even billions of people. And I mentioned the pollution. This is also another form of pollution. You'll read in my newsletter about all the electronic pollution now. It's literally millions and millions of tons of stuff that we're throwing out, used phones and projectors and screens and everything. It's just piling up. So the major effects also, a decline in populations of fish, birds, and mammals, but not humans. We're a mammal, right? But we're not declining, but every other species of mammals is declining. Every other species of wild animals. And birds, they say now that in Western Europe, in France, Germany, Spain, and in all those countries, they're losing up to 70% of their birds. They're just dying. They're dying off. They're disappearing. And amphibians and reptiles. So we have a very badly damaged biodiversity. Agriculture and fisheries disruption. So increased salinization, drought, crop effects, chemical dependency. We're having to use so many more chemicals to produce our food. And it's not that we have to, it's because it works, and it's also controlled by big corporations who are making lots of money by developing all these fertilizers and pesticides, and then they're polluting the environment, they're killing the insects, they're killing the bees. And you know there's a huge decline of bees globally, all over the world, and we rely on bees to produce almost 20% of all the food around the world, 20% just from bees, because they pollinate the flowers, and then the flowers, of course, turn into seeds, and we eat those seeds. Disease spread and new vector opportunities like Zika in South America and southern United States. We actually thought Zika would be reaching Canada by now, but unfortunately, Zika just died out, the Zika virus. It just disappeared now. We don't know why, but ticks carry also viruses, and they're spreading now in many more areas of Canada and in North America, and other different types of invasive species where people bring animals from one country to another and then they take over. Those are called invasive species, a huge issue. And animal health effects, heat stress. Animals are just like us. They can only survive in a certain range of heat. Malnutrition and mental illness, post-traumatic stress disorder, air pollution, loss of employment, forced migration. People are leaving their homes en masse now, particularly in our part of the world from Central America. They're coming up through Central America through Mexico and into the United States, and it's causing a huge issue in the United States and also into Canada. But a lot of the people from the warm countries don't like to come to our country because it's so cold in the winter, but they're coming nonetheless. And so soon there will be just people just running into countries because they're escaping drought, they're escaping floods, and they have no choice. And records are continually being set, record upon record upon record, pretty well daily now. Here you can see some glaciers melting. Dead polar bear. Oh. Okay, I was going to talk a bit more about agriculture, but just to say that because of global warming, there are some crops that will actually do better because they like the heat and they can grow more, and the season is extended. But beans are not one of them. 60% of all current land in another 20 years could be unsuitable for growing beans because beans need to have a cool night. And it's just like oranges. You know, oranges are green, right, on the tree. But if you have a sharp difference between daytime temperature and nighttime temperature, the orange turns orange. Without the change in temperature, the orange stays green. But that's just an effect. It doesn't affect the sweetness or the vitamins or anything. Fisheries and agriculture, this is a huge issue because now we're relying for fish on fish farms. We're getting something like 70% of our fish globally from aquaculture, from fish farms. And as the ocean warms, so do diseases begin to take over in all those ponds and all those fish farms. And so then now they're dumping more and more. Literally every year, hundreds of tons of antibiotics are used in fish farms to control the diseases amongst the fish. And what does that do to us? Well, microbial resistance. One of the biggest threats to human health that we have going on right now is that our antibiotics are not as effective as they were before, and very little development taking place. And another big issue of the fisheries is the coral reef system. The coral reefs are very, very sensitive to temperature of the water. Now, you've all heard of coral bleaching, because in Australia right now, they are having, as we speak, the 6th mass coral bleaching event, where the Great Barrier Reef, which is about 2,000 kilometers long of corals, and it has the greatest biodiversity of fish, and many thousands, hundreds or millions of people rely on it, not only for tourism, but also for food. It is dying. The coral reefs all around the world are dying, but they first start out being bleached. And what happens is that all corals have little microplankton that live in them. All the ends of the corals are full of microplankton. And those microplankton give the coral its colors. You know, corals are beautiful. They're red, blue, purple, green, orange, all different colors. That's because of the microplankton that live inside of the coral, the carbon structure, the carbonate structure of the coral. Now, when the oceans warm and sustain that warmth for a certain level of period of time, those microplankton leave. They say, I can't live here anymore, I'm leaving. And so they leave, and the coral turns white. And that's coral bleaching. Right now, that is happening to thousands of kilometers of coral in Australia right now, but also in many other countries, maybe even here too in Bali, I'm not sure, some of your coral reefs. But if the temperatures do not decline, if they're sustained high, the plankton will not return. And after 2 or 3 years, the coral actually dies. Now, those coral are the result of decades, hundreds and hundreds of years of growth. Corals don't just grow like rice and corn, you know, get 2-3 crops a year. Coral takes years and years to grow, one cell at a time. And if they die, they're gone. There is no replacement, although now in Australia particularly, they're experimenting with implanting coral into the dead reefs. So they grow the coral in nurseries on land and then take them and plant them, just like you do the rice, into the paddy and back into the coral to try to rejuvenate the coral. So this is a huge issue all over the world. Every tropical country is having an issue with coral disappearing. And you can see here, this was on January 29th, just 2 months ago, the relative high heat of the ocean. The red is extremely high heat, and that's called an alert level 1. And it's alert all over the place. It doesn't look like Indonesia is affected by any level 1s, but look at Australia, all the East Coast, all the Great Barrier Reef, and look at Oceania in the middle. And then even across and that's actually where it goes into South America, is the pattern of the ocean currents for El Nino. So scientists know it's mostly global warming that's killing the reefs and causing all of these issues. You know, in that movie and that little video, the narrator said that climate scientists think it's most likely. And because that was the terminology several years ago. And several years ago, it was like 97% of all climate scientists believed that it's we humans who are causing the climate change. Now it's 99.9% of climate scientists. Even those who are being paid by the oil companies, being paid by the big agriculture companies, etc., they have changed their mind too, because they can't go to meetings anymore and say what they used to say at meetings, because it's just wrong. Climate change is real, and it's happening to such a huge degree. I'm just going to skip forward. Floods, big thing. Floods, you know, are a huge problem because we are affected as humans by so many waterborne diseases. So many waterborne diseases. Hepatitis, gastrointestinal diseases, leptospirosis, all kinds of waterborne diseases affect us. And when you get big floods, the sewage that animals and humans put down into somewhere, it all comes back up. It gets brought up to the surface again by the floods. And also a huge increase in physical illness and also psychological distress. This is a huge issue now with the climate crisis. And I'm going to, and I know because time is intense heat waves and fires, extreme hot days. These are just in Canada. We can show in Canada that relative mortality, this is the death rate in Canada, goes up as we get hot days. Now, a hot day in Canada is 30 degrees, okay? We can show that our mortality rates go up when we have days, prolonged days of 30 degrees. And this is the response of the world generally. You know, one little plant and we cut all the forest down. Decrease in water supplies. Impacts on livestock. I'm not going to go through this, but if you ever need a very interesting schema of explanation of the health effects from climate change, this is a good complicated one. So how does climate crisis affect mental health? So the impacts of the drought, the heat, the disasters, the rains, the floods, the rising seas, the fires, etc. So we have two basic groups here. One is the population as a whole, and then particular groups. So a big issue is isolation and loneliness. It's so interesting that right in the last maybe 10 years, we're now focusing on the psychological impacts of loneliness. In fact, in the United Kingdom, they have a minister in the government, a minister of loneliness, because it is having such a huge impact on the health of particularly older people that they now dedicate a whole minister to it. Suicide, and I've got some references for all of this. Suicides amongst farmers in India. They are committing suicide at much larger rates now because of drought and because their farms are not able to produce for their families. And so the farmers take their lives. Huge issue. Post-traumatic stress disorder. This is becoming so much more well known about in just the last 10, 15 years. But study after study has shown about Hurricane Katrina that hit New Orleans about 5 years ago in the United States. Huge increase in PTSD, very large increase. In first responders, we know now in Canada from our experience last year with all the wildfires that many of the firefighters are suffering now today from post-traumatic stress disorder. That all the fires that they were working on day after day, seeing dead animals, thousands of dead animals, people fleeing their homes, even people dying in their homes. And it's like being a fireman or a policeman, seeing people being shot and killed. It's the same now because of the fires, and including animal deaths. And particularly as we speak right now in Mongolia, you know, the country just north of China, just in the last little while, over 5 million animals have died. 5 million animals. And it's not a big, it's a big country, but it's a very small population. And most of their animals are dying now because of drought. And it's causing huge problems. Loss of livelihood and unemployment. That's similar to the farmers who can't grow their crops. But many people now are losing their jobs because of climate change, because of the climate crisis. And when you can't work to provide for your family, you may suffer from depression. And you may suffer even from PTSD and war and conflict. There are really good studies that the war in Syria that had been going, has still been going on right now, but about 10 years ago or so, it was directly related to the climate change because there were 3 years of drought the farmers and the people from the villages came into Damascus, the capital city, and protested. Well, the dictator there, Bashir Assad, he didn't like the protests, so he killed them. And it started a civil war. Next. Increase in violence. There are studies now that there are increases in rates of domestic violence and child abuse after hurricanes and wildfires. This is a very serious problem. I talked about how the family is the unit of our society, is what we're based on. And now there's huge increases because of climate crisis of child abuse and domestic violence. And mostly it's all against women. It's not really much against men. And depression, in decreasing happiness, in youth, fearing their future. There's all kinds of studies now in Canada and the United States and Western Europe about how youth are afraid of the future now because they're listening to lectures by me and they're seeing, you know, what's really going on outside. And then they go to these conferences and the adults are doing nothing. And so you get the people like Greta Thunberg in Sweden. And she says, you know, the future is ours. We're the children. It's our future, and you better start doing something for our future. We don't want to even go to school. We'll protest. So they take days off of school to protest in front of their parliament building, just last Friday, actually, in Sweden. So children are also witnessing death and disaster and loss of parents because they're burning up in homes. They're dying of suicide, etc. And that's, I don't know, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I know it must affect children. It can't be a happy time for a child to lose their parents. Displacement from homes and country. Millions of people are now being displaced. You know, there was a big flood in Pakistan two years ago. 70% of the country was flooded. 70% was flooded. 20, 30 million people lost their homes. I don't know, and I don't know if there's been studies, but that's got to affect their mental health. All of those people losing their livelihoods, their farms flooded. And still, today, 2 years later, about 20 to 30% of Pakistan is still flooded. It hasn't gone down because the earth can only absorb so much. And it was flooded. 70% of the entire country flooded about a meter. Yeah, unbelievable. And urbanization. So if you get a hurricane hitting a city like Acapulco, poof, 80% of people lost their homes, their businesses. Sleep disruption, like I mentioned about the heat in the nights. Without air conditioning, elderly and children are very much affected, and everybody's affected too. And increasing in autism. And I've got the reference right next for you. Now they can show through these studies that there's a big increase of autism in the United States because of social media, because of particularly children under 2 years of age using social media, the parents sitting them down in front of the TV all day or giving them a phone to play with. They're having no social interaction. They're losing their social skills. They're losing even their ability to learn to talk and other things. And so as we all do more social media, we just sit around, you know, in a coffee shop or in a classroom and read the social media. And it is really not good for society in general, although it has its benefits, right? And so this huge increase in autism spectrum disorder, it's now in part related to and here's just some references for you. You can have them and use them later. But moving mental health into disaster preparedness spotlight, very interesting article. So what can be done and what must be done? So in general, at these meetings, they talk about three things. They talk about mitigation, adaptation, and financing. Those are the three things. Mitigation means lower greenhouse gases, stop polluting the world, get rid of oil, get rid of the pollution, the sources of it, more solar, more wind power, use less, improve the efficiencies of our homes. Adaptation. This is where most of the money, though, is going now, is adaptation, because it's happening in real time. And in order to protect lives, our governments are putting huge amounts of money into adapting our societies to absorb the impacts. In fact, in parts of Florida in southern United States near Miami, they're actually raising the roads by 2 meters, just so that when the ocean comes in, it doesn't take away and flood over the roads all the time now. In Miami City, one of the most beautiful, richest cities in the world, every single week there's a flood now, every week. And so they're actually raising the roads. And now insurance companies aren't even giving insurance to the homeowners because they know the insurance companies are going to lose money, or the homeowners won't be able to pay $2,000 to $3,000 a month just for fire and flood insurance. But also education is so important, and leadership. Leadership is so important. We rely on our politicians, the heads of our universities, and heads of departments, and all of that for the leadership. And the United Nations and all of the world and the governments put together. And it's just not happening at the level it needs to be. Sure, there are good leaders for sure, but there are so many that aren't. And it's very interesting to know that Russia is one of the largest climate change denying countries in the world. Their official line on their media and politicians is that climate change doesn't exist. And collaboration. Again, this is the whole idea of organizations, people coming together and working together. But we need multidisciplinary collaboration. We need psychologists, we need all different types, business people, government people, teachers, doctors, nurses, everybody to work together. And it's very interesting too, because we talk about these goals to 2030. Of reducing only by 40% of levels back in 1990 or whatever. But it's happening today already 6 years ahead of 2030. But then what about after 2030? You know, 2030 now is only 6 years away. And now people are talking about 2050. Well, to me, 2050, you may as well be blowing in the wind. You know, it's terrible. And India, you know, India is undergoing a huge kind of industrial revolution right now. And their goal is to reduce their greenhouse gases by 2070. Well, 2070, we're going to be real lucky if our grandchildren are still around here. Okay. So I like this one because what is needed is a major transformation, literally. What we need is kind of like a revolution. I'm not a revolutionary. I don't believe in you know, huge rapid changes in society and that sort of thing. I've always myself kind of go one step at a time to create change, incremental approach. But we really need to move the incremental pace fast and faster, because it's happening. It's happening without, whether we do it or not, it is happening. And there's so much inertia built up already. But who is involved and who is everyone? So on the slides, you'll see here, I've just got a whole thing about different stakeholders. But I think it's interesting, and I'd like you to look at this after the presentation about some of the major meetings and the major policies that the world has developed together at these conference of parties, COP meetings. You know, there was just one in Dubai last December, and there's going to be another one in Kazakhstan in this year, in December of this year. I was lucky, I went to the one in Glasgow in 2022 and experienced a big global convention, and it was very, very interesting. But again, they make these proclamations and then nobody does anything hardly. Nothing much happens. And here, to me, this guy, you may recognize him, Antonio Guterres. He's the Secretary General of the United Nations. He's one of the greatest leaders going right now, I think, because every day almost he's speaking out against climate change. He's speaking out against war in Gaza. He's speaking out against war and also in Sudan and everywhere. But and of course, dealing with climate change takes money. It's going to take lots of money. And But you can see the red line is where the money is, and you can see the dotted line of where it needs to go. Difficult to see how that's going to happen. These are the contributions from the rich countries. So it's the rich countries that have basically caused the whole problem, because we're the ones that have used up all the gas and oil to create our societies. It's not the poor person and the farmers in Africa, or even in working the fields on rice paddies here, that have caused the climate change. No, it's the rich countries. And here's the climate summit. Well, what if it's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? Well, if that was the case, that would be wonderful if we could create a better world. But it's not for nothing. It definitely is not for nothing. There. I'm going to just skip this one. There's all the people coming to the conferences, getting off their jets. So this is the increase that you saw earlier of carbon dioxide emissions in the world. And on the graph are each of the meetings of the United Nations. Every year there's a big meeting, a big, huge, thousands of people. Last year in Dubai, they said like 70,000 people attended, 70,000. And how do you get to Dubai? I don't know. You don't take a train, you don't take a boat, and you don't walk. Now that's tongue in cheek. These are just 30 things people can do. So my key messages: cross-cultural learning. Just like I'm here today from my culture, sharing with you, and I'm here in Bali to learn your culture and share with you and try to understand the world from your point of view. We call that cultural intelligence or cultural competency, cultural humility. And it's important that we take it from a humble point of view and not think that my way of doing things is better than your way. And you thinking that your way is better than mine. No, we all have our own way. And we can share and we can learn from each other, and I can take some of your examples and you take some of mine, but we all live in a different environment and we're all affected by our environment. But we need creativity. We need the young people in these bachelor's programs and the master's programs and the PhDs to really start thinking and doing things differently, not just giving us back the same old answers. I was once told that there is no advancement until the professor is put aside, or that the students become better than the professor. And I really believe that. I spent my whole life learning, but what's going to make a big difference isn't what I learn now, it's what you learn now as students and others. You must move beyond me. You must move beyond your professors. And I always talk about in my lectures on management of effectiveness, efficiency, and equity. And now, of course, environment. It's just unbelievably important. Striving for human rights, which I mentioned, community engagement, building disciplinary and multidisciplinary collaborations, on-site engagement. Get your students out into the communities, out into the homes of the people. See the reality, not just read about it in books. You got to live it. You got to see it. And campus activism. So when I was a young student, we were always protesting and doing things. Now the students today, there's no protesting, there's no nothing. They just go to their classes, they go home and they start doing Facebook and Instagram and stuff. They're not out on the streets trying to create change in society. So students, get out there and strive for quality and blend modern medical and public health science with the social sciences, with engineering, traditional healing and living systems. All people have something to contribute. And it's very important that we respect our traditions too. And remember, politicians listen to those who make the most noise or who have the most money. But I was with a politician on a webinar a couple of weeks ago, and that's what he said. He said, we listen to those who make the most noise. So if you want to influence your government, you got to somehow make noise, whatever that is. Oh boy, I'm going backwards. Can you go forward? Yeah, forward. Yeah, more. Lots more, about 7. Yes, you keep going. Yeah, more. more. I don't know what, oh, it's just going back into a loop. Can you go to the big screen? Go down, more down. Okay, there. Okay. So here's a little bit about my newsletter, and I'll end on this. So as I mentioned to you, at first I started publishing what I call Global Health Weekly. And then when I realized that the environment was so important, I changed it to Planetary Health Weekly. And this is comes out every Thursday. And go down one. And this is a picture from Kalimantan, from Borneo, 2 weeks ago. But there's the website, www.planetaryhealthweekly.com. It's free. You can sign up for it if you like, no problem. I like to get new readers. Go down. And this is also a book about leadership. And I just had published a chapter in here called Responsible Leadership, the Climate Crisis and Preserving Planetary Health. We can't discount that leadership. But the other thing is that as university members, you're all leaders. You're all leaders in your community, in your family, in your friends or whatever. And it's up to you too to help direct and help to teach and help to encourage others to make changes. Next. So thank you so much. I'm very happy to be with you here today. It's a true honor, and just looking around and seeing your faces and hopefully some of the learning that took place. I'm really grateful for the invitation, and I look forward to it. And please feel free to contact me at any time if you want to ask more questions. Maybe we have a minute or two for questions. I don't know. I've taken up all my time.
Let's give a big round of applause first for Professor Zakus. When I look at the audience, nobody's sleeping. So it means your talk really interesting for everybody, and make maybe some of us our jaw drops because overwhelmed by what you've been presenting to all of us. But also as a psychiatrist, like you said, this affect the mental health. Maybe also some of your talk create climate anxiety, start creating climate depression. For us, it's good because maybe adding some patience for us. Okay, let's open for discussion as the time is very valuable for Professor David. From the audience that would like to discuss some of the material or things that you want to ask, the time is open. Okay, from the psychiatric residents or from the public health? Anyone would like to ask a question?
Well, I know it was a lot to take in all at once, but when you told me I had 2 hours,
yes, no problem. Maybe they start to switch from English version to Indonesian version, the language barrier. Bisa dalam bahasa Indonesia, bisa dalam bahasa Inggris. Kalau terlalu sulit mencerna bahasa Inggris tadi, bisa dengan bahasa Indonesia bertanya. Silakan. Dr. Amita, silakan.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Amita. I'm a psychiatric resident. It's 4 decades. We all, most of the leaders in all of the countries have talked about mental health issues that related to the global health and the global climate change. But as you said before that, a lot of things are not happen accordingly to all the conference that have been done in those years. And what I learned and what I know about this climate change is, like you say in your explanation, that maybe the only thing that can affect the climate change was if only the big countries or the rich countries take the serious actions about it. And what can we do as the commoners, as the ordinary people that live and get affected mostly in this global change? And as I am in the psychiatric divisions, what can we do aside of take the serious of the mental illness, like for example, in those people that get affected, like the farmers who suicide themselves, or maybe the people who are working, or the people who live that get lost of their things, and maybe they get depressions. What can we do aside of taking care of them? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very, very good question. And of course, it's one that, I think about too. What can I do too? But I think there are a few things though that everybody and at all levels can do. One is that for sure that you work within your own discipline. You can do research and teaching, and through your research, you can help guide policy. If you find out that the rice farmers are suffering from large levels of depression, say because their crops aren't growing properly or whatever, the government needs to listen to that, and they will, with various different sectors of society. So I think that however we can make noise through our research, through our teaching, and even through the clinical practice. Maybe one of your patients is the prime minister or something, or the governor or whatever. But that's one area. And then I think too that the things that you can do, even though they are insignificant, turning lights off or buying an electric scooter instead of a gas scooter or whatever, it helps to create change eventually. And unless we start somewhere, we won't get anywhere. And we will never get anywhere unless we try. And so I know that a lot of people feel that it's even hopeless now because of there's so much going on, and it's the big rich countries that are polluting and all of that. But it is encouraging that a lot of the wealthy countries are taking it seriously now, because they see their societies changing and affected seriously by it. So they have to change. And the more that they hear from the people, because like me, you also live in a democratic country, and you can help influence the politics to some degree. I know it's very difficult even in a democratic country, but we do have a say. And and one other group that I forgot to mention were the media, were the journalists. And if you have friends who are journalists, educate them and tell them about your research, and tell them about what you're doing so that they can write about it in the press, because they have great power of reaching people. And and I never did get to it on the presentation, but one of the biggest issues affecting all of this is the misinformation. We live in an era now where expertise is not respected, where learning and science is not respected so much. And that is really dangerous, because the people who are really making the most noise are the most uneducated or the most ignorant of our society. They're the ones who are claiming all the doubt and trying to get people to believe their ways. And it's a very small proportion, but they have such a big, they've got such a big voice now because of the social media. They can go on to Facebook and Instagram and all of that and make a big problem. And they can, one person in one city can join with another and another and another and another. And all of a sudden there's 50 or 60 of them, but You know, together they're individually they're nothing, but when they come together, they make a big noise, and that's a really serious problem. And now it's not affecting me so much, but it definitely will affect you, is artificial intelligence. This is a huge area that is just hitting the world over the head right now. How are we going to deal with computers that are becoming so smart? I have a colleague at the University of Alberta. He educated me about this concept called singularity. And singularity, there's even a singularity university in the United States. Singularity is the point in time when the computers will become smarter than humans. And all the predictions were that it would happen around 2045. But you know what? It's not 2045. It's 2025. It's like next year when the computers are going to be almost like smarter than we are. It's unbelievable, all this machine learning and the amount of money that's being poured into this research on artificial intelligence and how it affects us. I honestly, I don't know. But for the students now and for the practitioners, this artificial intelligence is really something to learn about and to understand, because it is going to really have a huge impact. It's like the invention of the computer almost, or the invention of the steam engine. It's a paradigm changing advancement of human knowledge, the artificial intelligence. And you know, when they can put 1 billion transistors on a 1 square centimeter computer chip, it's hard to even believe, but it's happening. Yeah. So the bottom line, though, is that you know, get together with your friends and your fellow residents and colleagues and have meetings about what you can do. And I know there are many issues in society. This isn't the only one. There are lots of issues, but this is definitely one to pay attention to, the climate crisis. It's here, it's affecting. And you know, what if it gets too hot in Bali for the tourists to stop coming? You know, the politicians will really take notice of that, because all the taxes and everything will disappear. But yeah, it's somehow how to create that noise.
Well, I hope I can answer for Dr. Amita. Important, the noise. Yeah. Speaking about noise, Dr. Savitri or Dr. Swandewi, we had experience also with the mosquito of the Wolbachia. How the scientists is overcome or getting lost because of the non-scientist speaking. Maybe Dr. Savitri want to share, or Dr. Ayu want to share. Yes, just so Prof. David can learn. As Prof. David said, he also want to learn from what's happening here in Bali.
Yeah, regarding collaborating with media. So actually I work in tobacco control area. So Indonesia is one of the highest burden country in terms of tobacco control. We have almost 90 million smokers in Indonesia, and tobacco industry is is very big in Indonesia. So actually I work in advocacy closely with the media, and we are engaging the media in almost every activities that we did. For instance, as small as we conducted a compliance monitoring or inspection to the venues in terms of smoke-free laws, we involve the media, and the media will help us also to inform the community, something like that. So, but that's from my experience. I think media partners, they need also news actually, and they in one hand, but we also need someone to convey our messages. So I mean, it's not only happening in Bali, it's actually in Indonesian level, in national level. We need a media partner, and actually we need to nurture also our relationship with them by regularly communicating and discussing. Maybe that's just small experience for me.
It's because often the media prefer the common language rather than the scientific language. So that's why they more listen to the people that make the noise from outside the campus of the science people. Yeah. Any other question from the audience? Yes, from the back. Dr. Wira, please.
Thank you. Let me ask in bahasa. Perkenalkan, saya Wirayanti, residen psikiatri. Tadi sangat menarik, banyak dijelaskan tentang climate change dan ada hubungannya dengan gangguan mental. Tadi banyak dijelaskan ada efek yang terjadi terhadap gangguan mental seperti PTSD atau depresi. Namun yang saya tangkap mungkin kebanyakan itu efek secara tidak langsung. Jadi yang tidak langsung, maksudnya climate change terus ada perubahan kayak kegagalan panen atau masa tertentu, akhirnya muncullah masalah-masalah psikiatri. Yang saya mau tanyakan di sini, apakah ada kayak pengaruh secara langsung, umpamanya bagaimana penjelasannya gitu, Prof? Umpamanya kayak apakah kayak suhu naik tiba-tiba orang tuh akan jadi marah, atau bagaimana, apakah ada dengan suhu naik dopamin meningkat gitu, jadi ada agresi, atau umpamanya air laut kayak tadi dibilang ada ekspansi di air laut karena peningkatan suhu, terus apakah itu juga kayak membuat hati senang seperti itu, mungkin pengaruh secara langsung. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Dr. Wira. So she's asking, is there a direct impact from the climate change to the human mental health rather than after it affect the environment then affect the people? Is there a direct impact that she wants to know more?
Okay, well, I think there is. I think the answer is yes. I do believe that there is a direct impact, but it's mediated through the events that are taking place, through the floods, through the fires, through the droughts, through the declining production of food or the deaths of animals. Like, right, I mentioned that right now in Mongolia, they just in the last few months had 5 million animals die. Well, these are people that are mostly herders and live with the animals and rely on the animals for their well-being. And I just can't imagine what the impact is on their mental health. They must be very, very depressed, very sad, to the point of even clinical manifestations. And like the farmers in India committing suicide. So we know, though, that adverse events can turn out positive. That one of my colleagues writes on adverse childhood events, that every child undergoes hardships of some sort. Maybe a parent dies, or they break a leg, or have to be in the hospital for months, or whatever, and they survive. Though the children survive, they overcome the events. And maybe this is also an important area for psychiatry, is how to enable people to overcome and to not reach the stage of clinical depression or to post-traumatic stress disorder, how to build in resilience into the population. There's a lot of talk about resilience. How do we respond to these catastrophic events? Do we get depressed, or do we become stronger by it even? And how do we do that? What is the advice to our population from the experts who understand those sorts of issues? So I honestly, though, do think that there is a direct impact of the climate crisis on mental health. And we perhaps see it and we don't even recognize it, even in terms of some of the violence that's taking place. Like, I wouldn't have thought that there would be a direct linkage between domestic violence and child abuse and wildfires and floods. But through epidemiological studies, they've now shown that there potentially is a link. Studies are studies, right? They don't prove causation. And that's another issue, is that it's, a lot of our studies do not prove causation, they prove association. And so we have to rely on that in our science. So, but I do believe that and I was always a very early advocate of mental health. You know, in primary health care, when it was enunciated in 1978 by the United Nations, by the World Health Organization, it included 7 key areas, but it did not include mental health. And in my teaching, I always included mental health. I added it as an 8th pillar, along with traditional medicine as well, because I think there's so much that people rely on their own forms of understanding the world through medicine and healing and treatment of disease, even, that they have to be taken into account. Even though we with our science may not believe it or think it's correct, they do. So we have to work together with them. So I think there's a huge opportunity for mental health practitioners to be engaged in this, because we will, these studies that I talked about are just new. They're just the first off the press kind of thing. You know, it's just an area that's just becoming more explored, as you mentioned too, about mental health in general. But now we've got this new crisis on hand, and so what are the implications? And so there's a huge role for research. And university is where we do research. So thank you.
Yes, I hope Dr. Wira can understand the explanation of Prof. David. Yes, I agree when you said we need to recognize, because this is time for us as a psychiatrist, I think, to re-evaluate our manual diagnosing for the mental health, because for all this time we still use the traditional way. For example, like asking people for depression is more about when they lost someone they love, but now we see they lost their home, they lost their land, they lost their biodiversity. Maybe we don't see that in our manual for diagnostic of mental health. That's why when we talk about direct impact, we need to reevaluate first our way of diagnosing people for mental disorder. And I agree with you that this is still new, and everybody needs to learn. And it's a great opportunity that we can hear directly from you. So kind of like awake all of us here, and like you said, to make more noise. Okay. I think there are many people that would like to ask more questions, but unfortunately, the time we have to end this meeting. And once again, let's give a big round of applause to Professor David. And I will give the time to Dr. Ayu for the closing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Prof. David. Because here in Indonesia, we should usually call people Prof and then first name. I hope it's okay with you. And yeah, I would like to welcome Dr. Sawitri, our the coordinator for the Master of Public Health program. And the meeting is also supported by her. So thank you, Dr. Sawitri. Yeah. Dr. Alit at the back, the course coordinator for the psychiatry residency program. Thank you, Dr. Alit, for joining the lecture today. So again, I would like to thank Professor David Zakus for like very enlightening talk, and I agree. I think all the participants can see what is happening. Although some of them maybe we have been experiencing these issues, but looking at the presentation, how it's compiled to show how big is the issues and what we can do from ourselves, like that. Yeah. So at the School of Public Health, one of our colleagues, she has a garbage bank program who collected plastic, paper wrap, cartons. So we open up like every 2 weeks on Friday. I think today is also they open today if you want to visit next door in the other building. So she started this initiative and involving the student. And you can imagine how many plastic bottles every day, every meeting. So I think this kind of initiative should be broadened. And actually in several villages in Indonesia and Bali, they also started this kind of initiative, which is a small thing that we can do, I think, from small villages growing up, which should contribute some part to slow down the changes on the climate that we can see. Like maybe all of us have been seeing like the science fiction movies that showing our earth will got dry because the hot and everything. It's not look like it's impossible if we do nothing to change. So like Prof. David mentioned earlier, it's not just about us and them, it's about us working together. I think that's the end of today's presentation and guest lecture. Thank you so much everyone for joining. On behalf of the Faculty of Medicine, I would like to apologize if there's anything not accordingly to all the expectation of the audience about today's and also from your expectation. Really pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much. So, Dr. Sawiti would like to hand over a small token for you. It's just as a reminder that you have been here in the school and the faculty. I think that's a yeah. So that's a Balinese hand woven fabric.